On our way to McDonald's. This time we watched Season 12, Episode 1, Mac and Me, or as it's known on the French side of the box, Mac et moi.
And don't forget, always Coca-Cola. Always.
But first, some follow-up. I don't know which one of you listeners did this, but there is now a TV Tropes page about It's Just a Show. So whoever did that, holy, that's amazing and very detailed, so thank you very much.
Yes, as I said on the social medias, that is like the best thing that I think that has happened to us for this show since Trace Spielberg gave us an internet high five.
And until it's proven otherwise, I'm going to assume Trace did this.
Yeah. He's been quietly following us for years.
That explains so much. Now, there's one thing. Now, there's a lot of great details here. I especially like the noticing of Donald Pleasance's importance on this podcast. However, I must take issue with the fact that in our follow-up section, the news is usually old. For shame, sir or madam. For you see, the news that we get is always as hot as it could possibly be. For instance, breaking news. I have it on good authority that Joel Hodgson will be departing as host midway through this 5th season. Oh, God! The show barely survived the departure of Josh Weinstein. What will we do? But thank you, TV Tropes person.
Yes, that was a lovely gift to find. Also, we have some listener mail. Nathan from Missouri wrote in to say, "Hey guys, love the podcast about the movie. You talked at length about It's a Long Way to Tipperary, which was really interesting. Thank you. I believe the youth in the movie had a different reason for being there. Trace is a big Mary Tyler Moore fan, and the song Tipperary was used on the last episode of her show as the newsroom team was saying their goodbyes. It could be that Trace was in his own way saying goodbye to Crow and Dr. F. They also used it at the end of Danger Diabolique by the Castle Forrester group just before the plug was pulled, as a little more overt reference. Keep up the great work, guys. Looking forward to your response to the gauntlet." Yeah, that's a really good take. The Tipperary thing, that's quite touching.
Yes, and who knew that was attached to the famous Mary Tyler Moore finale? I'd totally forgotten, because when I watched the Mary Tyler Moore show, I was really only interested in Lou Grant and Ted Baxter. All the other characters could go away.
The only thing I was interested in was Mary's apartments and comparing the two of them and which one was better and which one was worse.
Now, Rhoda, that's a show. It's got the comedy stylings of Lorenzo Music, and that's all you need.
He's in it?
Yeah, he's Carlton, your doorman.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was his first iconic role.
Well, something to check out after we talk about this movie, the very first in the gauntlet.
All right, so let's strap in and talk about one part of this 6-part adventure. This time we watched Season 12, Episode 1, Mac and Me. A bunch of alien arsefaces are hoovered up by a satellite that lands on their home planet and returns to Earth with said aliens as prisoners. One little alien bursts from the satellite and escapes, safely hiding in the Volkswagen of a very slow-witted family. Go to Volkswagen.com and enter the code IJAS to get 15% off your next purchase of a slow-witted family. This scrappy space alien is Mac, which means the kid in the wheelchair is me. It's like you've known me all my life, movie. Mac shows his loving nature by drilling through the walls of the house like it's goddamn Slumber Party Massacre, available on Blu-ray from Scream Factory. Eric, the kid in the wheelchair, is blamed for the mess, and his mother is furious because she's going to need more than a dustbuster to clean this mess. Just kidding. Dustbuster fits. Period. Eric goes for some fresh air, but his house is on an unguarded slant, so he plummets 40 feet into a lake. Mac rescues the boy and disappears. Eric tells everyone about the brown, bug-eyed peanut boy with a mouth like a fleshlight. Fleshlight, the anus that helps you see in the dark. Nobody believes Eric's tale of alien rescue, so the pint-sized Whitley Strieber enlists Deb to help him lure Mac out in the open with Coca-Cola. Catch the wave! Eric takes Mac to McDonald's, when you're here, your family, by putting his astral pal in a bear suit. Eric had it left over from that one Halloween where he and his brother went as those old guys from The Shining. You know the ones I mean. So now we have an unlikable blonde boy and a sentient teddy bear, which reminds me that The Pit will soon be reviewed on a part of our Scaritage, only on Megaphonic. Anywho, government goons spot Eric and his alien at the nation's #1 clown-themed eatery. The goons give chase. Mac and Eric barely escape, but are quickly picked up in a van by Debbie, her sister Courtney, and Eric's brother Michael. Mac guides them to a mine shaft where his family lies dying. The kids heal the Macs with Coca-Cola, eat fresh, so they go shopping. This goes awry and police are called, and Eric is killed in an explosion. Luckily, Mac and his family bring Eric back to life, and the Mac family fix Eric's unbeating heart, restoring him. Cut to several years later, the Macs, cosplaying as the Simpsons in their church clothes, are getting U.S. citizenship. The Macs, Eric, and Deb drive off in a pink Cadillac. Cadillac, it's the Ford Pinto of cars. Mac, using a no-name bubblegum, sends the audience a terrifying message. We'll be back. This summary contains sponsored content. I probably should have read that before the summary.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, in the opening segment, Jonah is back on the SOL and ready to share his daring escape from Reptilicus Metallicus after he was devoured at his wedding ceremony to Kinga Forrester. But the bots have lost interest. They've managed to upgrade Travel Cambot, who's this, to use pneumatics instead of hydraulics. Possible plot thread for later? We'll have to see, because the Mads are calling. And to Jonah's consternation, they've lost interest in the whole wedding fiasco too. And that's exactly how much attention this story arc deserves. The Mads are absolutely giddy about their new nefarious idea, the Gauntlet. Jonah and the bots will be forced to sit through 6 horrible movies back to back, the most toxic viewing binge since the entire run of Friends was uploaded to Netflix. They're hoping this will result in the dumbification of viewers, which will require them to buy their next invention, Algernon, based on the heartbreaking story of a mentally disabled man who briefly gains and then loses vast intellectual capacity. Algernon is a smartness drug that will grow your brain.
Side effects of Algernon include nausea, mouse friendships, and 1969 Oscar for Best Actor. Algernon may kill you if taken when the sun is out or setting.
Meanwhile, on the SOL, Jonah has converted the bots to giant Pez dispensers that dispense spam instead of candy. It's called Spez. Gross! In segment 2, Jonah attempts to communicate with Max on Moon 13 by imitating the whistles that the ballsack aliens use in the movie. But they can't quite get their accents right. It's only when the mellifluous Tom Servo steps in that Max is able to impart that Moon 13 is chilly. Kinga then interrupts to state that they're having corn on the cob for lunch. In segment 3, Crow, sporting the teddy bear costume that Mac disguises himself in, puts on a birthday party for a reluctant Tom Servo at McDonald's. Jonah McDonough pops up promising eternal entertainment and cautioning that Tom needs to start smiling before he upsets the all-powerful Grimace, played by Gypsy, who punishes those who displease them by depositing them in the ball pit. Meanwhile, inspired by the movie's cross-promotions, Kinga and Max have renamed themselves Burger Kinga and Office Max. In the final segment, Jonah and the bots are feeling winded. Tom declares that there's no way they can sit through 5 more of these movies. Jonah attempts to rally them when all 3 are sucked down to Moon 13. Jonah is ordered to make holes in the film canister that houses the bad movie experiments, and he gets 5 minutes to do it before the next film starts, Atlantic Rim.
All right, so we survived our first entry in the Gauntlet.
Yeah, so I think before we talk about the movie, we might just talk about the series itself. It's a lot shorter than the last one, and they have this interesting new idea. They've changed some other things too.
For instance, the episodes themselves are shorter, like each about 10 minutes shorter than every episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000, and they've gotten rid of the bumpers, the commercial breaks that they had inserted into the previous season.
I guess Roger Ebert was right all along.
Yes, he hated commercial breaks.
And the lighting is a little different. Jonah's gotten a haircut.
Yeah, it's much improved. I barely recognized him because it's such a superior haircut.
We see more of Waverly and Growler. They even come into the theater sometimes.
And also, for everyone who has been complaining about the sometimes too quick pace of the riffs, which includes us, they've learned their lesson because the delivery is a lot more relaxed, and this will help you in trying to figure out who is saying what because they're no longer speaking in clipped tones like they're Patrick McGowan.
There's a third lady bonehead. Nice to see. She's got a lovely skirt.
Mm-hmm. And just foreshadowing things to come, there is a special guest on this season that viewers will actually want to see because no offense, Mark Hamill, Jerry Seinfeld, and Joel McHale, but I don't ever want to see you on this show again.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything that makes me happy about what I've kind of experienced in this episode, everyone seems a lot more comfortable. It's like the anxiety is off a bit. They're settling into their roles, especially Kinga and Max. They seem to have a back and forth that is a lot more convincing now.
Yes, because I think that there was way too much of an over-reliance on Max being lovelorn and Kinga screaming.
Yeah,
that they've dialed back a lot in both regards, because Max no longer seems to have feelings for Kinga aside from one mention of what happened last season. And they seem to have more of the frenemies relationship that Dr. F and Frank had, which I'm so happy to see.
Yeah, it works better for these actors, I think, to not have that kind of awkward lovelorn piece to deal with, and they can just have fun with the material, and they seem to be doing that now.
Yeah, you've got people as talented as Patton Oswalt and Felicia Day in these roles. You may as well use them and have them do something more than one note.
Yeah, and just like a joke that you wouldn't have gotten in the last season, I really liked it, was when Kinga is just mixing a bowl and saying
it's a lovely bit of business.
Yeah. And saying that lunch is on, like that's the kind of thing that we always liked from, especially the Joel era, is just like a feeling of lived-inness that they didn't have in the last season. Justifiably so, they had just gotten started.
Yeah, and there's also like a nice bit of banter between them, like they're playing off of each other now. It's really refreshing, and like I said, it uses them a lot better than the previous season did.
I wouldn't say I've seen a lot of evolution in Joan and the Bots' relationship, but it's still early on. Yeah,
they're still slightly antagonistic towards them. It's almost a repeat of those early shows with Mike, but I mean that's fine. It's not sticking out like a sore thumb. That just might be a thing they develop later on or find a better fit for later on. Because Jonah, even though the character of Jonah Heston still doesn't have a lot of personality, like Jonah is so much more comfortable in the role, and the writers are better at writing for him, that I think the host segments are improved as well.
Well, I haven't watched past the first one, so I can't say if this is something that continues, but hopefully it is. Like, I think I'm much more excited about this season than I was after watching Reptilicus, which was the first episode of the last season.
So I guess this answers the question of whether or not this is a good episode to start the season with, because I'd say it's a resounding yes.
Yes, this movie, I think it is absolutely the best movie to start with because it has name recognition, right? Like, this is the one that everybody knows. It's just one of those classic fiasco movies that kind of like, the 80s version of Plan 9 from Outer Space that is just notorious for being bad, and the fact that it had some meme cachet because of Paul Rudd's repeatedly using the clip of the main character falling in the water as a sting on his visits with Conan, which never got old.
Yes, when he visited the famous barbarian. I have mixed feelings about using Mac and Me, and you mentioned Plan 9 from Outer Space. And I think, the original creators were wise to never do that on the original run, because it is too well known and people have such fond memories of seeing it and laughing at it, or going to live screenings and heckling it themselves. Like, I've been to B-Fest, which is a 24-hour terrible film festival, so I've been through the gauntlet way worse in real life. And they always end with a midnight screening of Plan 9. Or maybe they show The Wizard of Speed and Time before it, I forget. But they do that. And with Mac and Me, the only thing that rubs me the wrong way about this episode, which is otherwise quite solid, is that I've watched this movie with friends, and I had a better time. That's not to say that myself and my two pals, Gil and Ashley, who are not listening to this podcast, were better at riffing it, but more that I had a more fun time. Whereas with this, because it has those expectations of this is the funniest, worst movie ever, and oh boy, they're really going to bring their A game for the first episode of the season, I think the expectations are a bit high and they sort of miss the mark a little bit. Like, this isn't quite the knockout that, say, Star Crash was last season. But I did enjoy the episode, and that's the only thing I would kind of hold against it, is that this is almost like riffing Troll 2, which is another famous bad movie for our age group, and doing a solid but maybe not outstanding job.
That was actually a good point that maybe gives some insight into what I was finding lacking about this particular experiment. The movie itself, I think, I saw it as a young kid, probably on the Disney Channel. I certainly didn't see it in the theater. Seemed okay, but as the internet grew up, it became one of those movies that people would typically go to when they wanted to make fun of a bad movie. And I hadn't seen it since. It is really bad, but not in the ways that I was expecting. So one of the things that really struck me about the riffing is what they didn't riff. Because there's a lot of things that I actually think this movie does fairly well. I think the cinematography is lovely. There's some really interesting shots with running animals that they use a lot for no particular reason, but they look really nice. I think it was awesome of them to have, a visibly disabled kid as their star. And the way that they used that wheelchair was really inventive. In some ways, like there's a chase scene near the end where the kid actually has an advantage because he's in a wheelchair. He can go faster to get away from the bad guys.
Now, call me crazy, but at the end of the movie, when the aliens heal Eric, shouldn't he have been able to walk again?
I mean, if their ability is basically just like a defibrillator, then they can only just start hearts again. I can see why they didn't do that, because that's sending a strange message about, living with a disability. Mm-hmm. But what really struck me about this movie, the thing that really just screamed at me, is how utterly hideous the aliens are. Like, they're so upsetting to look at. I mean, just the appearance, they're just like liver spotted and flabby and lecherous. But then they start to walk. And this lurching shamble is just so upsetting. And that was the thing that kind of struck me the most, is like they didn't actually make a lot of jokes about the aliens' appearance. They actually seemed to like kind of consciously not touch that. I'm like, what a strange thing. Like it seemed like a really obvious, easy joke that they just seemed to want to stay away from. But
that also might be it. And going back to the movie's reputation and people covering this ground before in reviews and the like, is that those jokes have been made, which is why I think one of the standout jokes is when we see a shot of them. It's I believe it's on their desert planet, and I think it's Jonah who chimes in with, "It's the Blue Men Group, as you've never seen them before, brown."
Yeah, which is not to say that the riffs aren't good. They're really funny, but it was, and also like the over the top product placement, they didn't really push as much, and maybe it's just like the anxiety of influence, that they already knew the jokes that had been made and didn't want to kind of recycle them again. But in a way, it just feels like they're pulling their punches to some extent.
I suppose so. But then again, that's the danger with riffing something that's this well known. I mean, one of the principal pleasures of Mystery Science Theater 3000 is discovering movies. And it's kind of a shame that it's like, oh, it's a really famous bad movie that you've seen that has been written about 1,000,000 times. Like I said, I think they did a fine job with it. It's an odd choice. It's an odd choice in some respects.
Well, it's certainly one of the reasons why I never really checked out riff tracks, is because having them riff over things I already know is just not really what I'm looking for in MST3K, So I see your point there. I can see why they did it, because especially on Netflix, getting people to watch the first episode is really what you're trying to do. So getting people who maybe aren't the biggest fans of the show but have heard of Mac and Me, that's probably how you get them, just kind of sink them in there. But I agree that maybe there was some sacrifices that were made as a result.
Yeah, it's a brilliant piece of marketing to use this movie, but, with that hook comes a terrible price. So you mentioned earlier, Beth, the pedigree of this movie in terms of the cinematography and just kind of the general production values of it, because it's lacking in only one respect, and that's special effects. And really, it's just costumes, because the satellite effects and the warping, vacuuming, aliens getting sucked up effects, those are fine. Mm-hmm. Those actually look decent. But the monster costumes look like weird first passes at doing a live-action Ren and Stimpy movie.
Yeah, I just, there was a lot of ugly aliens in the 80s, and I think E.T. probably inspired that, because it's also an ugly alien, but the difference was it was a fugly alien, right? He had soulful eyes.
Yeah, it's an alien you want to fuck. Oh, God, you gotta go deep in that alien advertising.
No, I've always found him grotesque, but I can see why, you just have one thing that maybe you can connect to, the eyes were done really well, that gives you your lead-in, but there's just... Oh boy, I don't know what they were thinking with these. Another very 80s thing about this particular movie is the really over-the-top product placement.
And that started off with the noblest of intentions, because this was explicitly made as a McDonald's tie-in movie with the profits going to the Ronald McDonald's charities.
Right. Now, Ronald McDonald House is one of the most impressive charities out there. They basically created special houses for the families of children going through cancer so that they would be able to stay relatively comfortable during long hospital stays. It's an amazing project. And apparently they wanted that to be highlighted in this movie. It didn't really get highlighted. But they did not seek to have their product placed in here. It was the producer, what's his name?
R.J. Louis.
R.J. Louis, thank you. That approached them. He had some connections with them, and he was the one who convinced them, let's do this, let's put this in here, and we can get some money for your charity, and there'll be a good tie-in. And it was not this was not a cash grab on the part of McDonald's.
No, in fact, they were reluctant to have Ronald McDonald in the movie. That was one of their stipulations. No Ronald McDonald, and yet he's in the movie anyway.
Yeah, that's strange. Looking back on movies like E.T., which has the Reese's Pieces, or even Cry Wilderness from last season, which had the Coke cans, it does seem like this product placement is really over the top. And I've been trying to figure out why the 80s had an appetite for it, or at least why they didn't find it quite so intrusive as we currently do.
Oh, well, people did. I mean, I remember there were articles written objecting to the growth of product placement, and it had gotten so ubiquitous that when it came time to film They Live, the director and screenwriter, John Carpenter, wanted to get actual products in the movie, because when the main character puts on special glasses, he would see the horrible Orwellian messages that are in every advertisement and every Coke can, and not a single advertiser bit. It would have been the first use of smart product placement in a movie, but I guess that had to be Wayne's World.
Indeed. So my theory is that we're dealing with the 80s. I get the sense that it had a very different relationship to consumerism than we do now. First of all, there was not a lot of regulation anymore.
Yes. At this point, famously, Saturday morning cartoons were deregulated. So that's why you saw the rise of animated toy commercials like He-Man and She-Ra.
Exactly.
And even My Little Pony.
Exactly. But it's also just this was a time of extreme optimism about American consumerism and what it could do for the world. This was still... You still very much had the Americans versus the Soviets going on in the 80s. And there was a sense that the Americans felt that they were winning the war, not through military might, but through cultural might. The famous story of the black market jeans and the Michael Jackson bootlegs going around Russia, that was the way they were going to conquer the world, was through their products. So I think McDonald's and Coke had this sense of benevolence about them, that they were the best that America could offer in a lot of ways, which is why, they're always used to convert strange creatures into becoming Americans. So I really feel the fact that there's a citizenship ceremony at the end, which I love, because they're basically turned into Dwight and Mamie Eisenhower, right? It doesn't get more 50s than that.
And they look far more horrifying in clothes than out of them.
Exactly. But I think that's it. These products are meant to sell America as a culture to non-Americans and to turn them into Americans, basically.
And also for the kid audience, you're communicating, oh, the aliens are just like us. I like candy, just like E.T. and Mac, so they are like me.
Yeah, and kids do love candy.
Yeah, and because they're advertised to so aggressively, really starting in the 80s, that became kind of a shorthand for communicating familiarity and place with them in movies in the 80s and early 90s.
I think you make a good point about the familiarity too, because I think that was Spielberg's unique genius, was the ability to mold the extraordinary and the extremely pedestrian in ways that seem to create magic. Like, that was the thrill for me, was seeing somebody in like a supermarket having to deal with something extraterrestrial and ordinary, like a supermarket that looked just like the one I went to, you know? That's what gave it its magic, I feel like.
So that's why you love the police shootout scene in this movie?
I was thinking more about when they go to the mall. They're trying to escape the FBI. They go through the mall. His mom sees him the first time. There's all this crazy stuff happening. The kids themselves are being pushed to extraordinary lengths that they would not have been capable of before. That felt very Spielbergian in that moment.
And it's kind of inescapable now, because it's funny when you listen to, say, old stand-up of the 80s and 90s. Once you get past all the homophobia, sexism, and racism and anti-trans stuff, which is a lot of it, there's so much pushback and caustic commentary on the fact that malls are a thing and they used to not be.
Interesting, because they're dying now.
Yeah, but in our childhood, they were everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the main satirical points of the late 70s Dawn of the Dead. And in fact, I think that movie uses not quite product placement, but they filmed in an actual mall using the real stores and real products. And that created a familiarity for the setting, but it also gave a amusing look at having zombies come into the store and just milling about the mall because it's something that they remember and they don't know why, but it was important.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of we're seeing a slice of life that to some extent doesn't exist anymore, and that's interesting too.
Yes, goodbye malls, goodbye fast food in movies, although there is the unforgettable scene from Batman Forever in which he assures Alfred, I will have no meal, I will get drive-thru, and then I think he goes to McDonald's.
Yeah, that was Batman Forever.
Yep, that was the Val Kilmer one. The Batman most likely to go to McDonald's.
Well, Adam, I think it's about time you took us over to the Score Corner.
Otherwise known as the Scorner. This movie has a great deal of production value for it. It mainly fails in special effects. And one of the ways this movie shines is with a score by Alan Silvestri.
Yeah, so I don't know anything about this guy, but I certainly, the score was very 80s. That's the only thing I can say about it in terms of, very uplifting, orchestral, dramatic, sort of Back to the Future-ish stings all over the place.
Indeed. To narrow it down for listeners, this wouldn't be the kind of synth-heavy score that you would get with a delightful film like Jim Wynorski's Chopping Mall. No. Beth is referring to the style of Silvestri that you would have heard in the films that he scored, namely Who Framed Roger Rabbit and the Back to the Future trilogy, of which this score feels like outtakes from.
Yeah, a little bit.
There's even a riff in the episode.
I want to see the movie this composer thought he was scoring.
Because they give sass to the score a number of times. And I don't blame them, because the score is trying to do a lot of heavy lifting for the fact that the special effects don't work.
Yeah.
I managed to track down the CD release, the very limited CD release of the Mac and Me soundtrack.
Wow, good job.
That's dedication. And in the liner notes, Silvestri was interviewed about the project, and I think this sums it up. He says, in a movie like this, when you're not getting a lot of help, I was able to reimagine the picture and recreate it as the movie Mac and Me was trying to become.
Yeah, that was one of the things that came out in one of the articles, the Thrillist. Even though it had good intentions, they walked into it essentially without a script. So maybe that's what he's referring to. It was really poorly executed from the get-go.
Yeah, but also he had to bring Mac to life, and there was no hope in doing that. You had an awful puppet, that was, I think why it didn't work is that it simply didn't have any expressive features. Like the eyelids could close, but you couldn't get any emotion from the eyes. And the mouth was always in this horrible circular shape. So you had this nightmare creature, and he had to make it a thing that kids would want to love. And even though in the liner notes, Silvestri describes trying to create a feeling of disorientation throughout the whole score to reflect how Mac and his family would feel arriving on Earth. I really just think he's relying on Alan Silvestri cliches because you could put any of this in Roger Rabbit or Back to the Future or even that Van Helsing movie you did with Hugh Jackman, and it would sound perfectly in place. I think he was as lost as anybody because he was handed a dud that had like a lot of talent for it. Like R.J. Louis had produced The Karate Kid. You know, you have Christine Ebersol as the mom, and like all the acting is good, actually. I would say all the cast is great.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who made fun of the main actor, Jade Caleroy. A lot of people suggest he's not a good actor. I found him perfectly fine.
Oh, you know what? I'll go one further. I think he was a really good child actor. Like he didn't set his foot wrong at all. And the one thing that I found hard to swallow or uncomfortable in the movie performance-wise is when what the bots describe as he and his mom having a Spider-Man kiss. That's just bad direction.
Right.
That's just terrible, like, shooting and blocking and framing of a scene. Like, all of that was just gross and weirdly intimate. Back to the score. So we're mainly looking at two modes. You've got a synthy alien theme, which is used primarily in the beginning and is reprised here and there to really hammer home the heart of Mac and his family and the plight of his people.
Right.
But for the most part, you're looking at pizzicato strings and brass to get that sense of excitement and disorientation. And he said that there was a certain playfulness in the score in that he was trying to create a sound that would play like a comical version of Bernard Herrmann's great The Day the Earth Stood Still score.
Oh, interesting.
And I can't quite hear that aside from the fact that there's some Herrmann-esque strings, but that's part of Silvestri's go-to style anyway. So I don't know if he's talking out of his ass mouth there. Sorry, I'm thinking of the aliens. I don't know if he's talking out of his ass there, but he might be. He might be trying to find meaning in this desperately bad movie that he had to do for a paycheck.
Yeah, sometimes that's just what you gotta do. No shame.
Yep, and he even had his hand in songwriting here. While I think he did a fine job with the score, like it's actually perfectly pleasant to listen to, it's not quite as good as his Who Framed Roger Rabbit score, which I personally think is his best. He wrote 2 songs for Mac and Me, and there's a bunch of them, but he only wrote 2 of them. Jarrah Lane's You're Not a Stranger Anymore and Bobby Caldwell's Take Me, I'll Follow. They're both ballads, they're both syrupy and overproduced, and they're both terrible.
Are they in the movie?
Yes.
Okay. Anything I heard was bad.
Yes.
And very 80s.
Yes, and they were indeed. These would not be out of place cueing a serious scene in a sitcom. Like they had that serious, syrupy keyboard sound that you would hear on a sitcom of the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no good. But the score is all right. And Silvestri, this movie, fortunately did not kill his career. Very easily could have, I think, because he was, again, he had made a long-term friendship with Robert Zemeckis, who had directed all the movies that Silvestri scored that I mentioned, save Van Helsing. Mm. And with that, you know, he's as a result, he's scored movies that everybody knows. Forrest Gump, the aforementioned Back to the Future trilogy, Polar Express. And I find it interesting that he fell into film scoring totally by accident.
Really?
Yeah, he was just a guitarist and drummer bumming around in LA. He was playing with a songwriter by the name of Bradford Craig. And he had no eye for film scoring or really going into orchestral composition or anything like that. And the songwriter, Craig, was tapped for a score, didn't know how to do it. So he called Silvestri to write a score for the movie called The Doberman Gang in the 70s. And that was enough that he could get his career started. But he had to learn how to score a film from scratch.
Wow.
Do you know how he did it?
I couldn't imagine.
He went to the library and found a book called How to Score a Movie.
Really?
Yes, and you can still get it. It's on Amazon. Earl Hagen's How to Score a Movie. I've also seen it released as Earl Hagen's Scoring for Films. Yeah, that's still in print. You can still get it if you want to learn the basics and become the next Alan Silvestri.
Have you read it?
No.
Okay. I'm always impressed where someone who can play one instrument is able to expand it to an orchestral score with like dozens of instruments. It's a talent that I cannot wrap my head around.
Yeah, but he and Craig, because Bradford Craig wrote the songs for that film, the two of them did such a good job that Alan Silvestri got a TV gig writing the scores for episodes of Chips.
Nice.
And from there, film work. And he's been busy ever since. Like, he's one of the top composers. Like, I know he scores some of the Avengers movies, so he's tapped by Marvel Studios. Like, he's one of Hollywood's best.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
All right, it's time to bloke out with your cokes out. It's the Shallow 13. 13 mostly agile considerations about Mac and me and MST. Go, Beth, go!
Crow finds today's movie suspiciously familiar.
I can't help feeling like I've seen all this before. Single mom, suburban kid, big brother, little girl.
Yeah, that's ET.
No, that's not it.
Turns out Crow's thinking of the 1983 summer camp hijinks movie Meatballs Part 2. And in fact, Crow's summary, junk food loving alien gets separated from his family and helps kids fly. That's all in Meatballs 2.
Yeah, we'll have a clip of the Meatballs 2 alien calling one teen a dork and smoking pot in our show notes. This installment in the Meatballs franchise starred Richard Mulligan, John Larroquette, and Paul Rubens not playing Pee Wee Herman. There's no mention of original star Bill Murray, as none of the Meatballs sequels connect. Part 3 is about a nerd losing his virginity with the aid of a porn star's ghost, played by Sally Hot Lips Kellerman, and Part 4 is a Corey Feldman vehicle.
When introducing herself and her sister to Eric, Debbie is seen enjoying a Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freezes, or Freezies, are long tubes of sugar water that, like Revenge, are best served cold. Freezies are a product of Kisco, which initially formed in 1968 and sold frozen snacks in Jamaica before relocating to Canada in the late 70s.
Deb chases after Eric and watches as his wheelchair sends him down the hill to certain doom. Servo pops in with this quote,
Chicken pie, tie in the wind.
Tom's imitating the secret language used by Jodie Foster as Nell in the movie of the same name. Turns out Nell picked up her unusual method of speaking by emulating her mother's stroke-affected speech patterns. But Nell's language consists also of code words only her and her sister would know? And Nell's not a good movie, guys.
When Mac takes Deb and Eric for a ride with the vacuum cleaner, Joan and the bot start singing yakety sax. Contrary to popular belief, sax was not created for the Benny Hill Show, though the comedian often used it in his program. The 1963 instrumental track was composed by Spider Rich and saxophonist Boots Randolph, and has since been covered by Chet Akins, Glenn Campbell, and Andre Rieu's orchestra. Link in the show notes.
The gang makes multiple references to boogalooing and having to save a building through the power of breakdance.
They must be throwing a breakdance benefit to stop an evil land developer from tearing down that McDonald's.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, save the McDonald's.
Breakin' and Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo were both released in 1984 by Golan Globus's The Cannon Group. Both films star Shabba-Doo, Boogaloo Shrimp, and Ice-T. The first film is about breakdancing getting no respect and sports a cameo by Jean-Claude Van Damme. Electric Boogaloo reunites the breakin' dancers as they try to save a rec center through breakdancing. The Go-Go Boys produced a semi-related film, Rappin', that was inexplicably released in some areas as Breakdance 3.
Jonah gets up and drums during the syrupy 80s song, imitating the drum solo from In the Air Tonight. The reference is not, surprisingly, to tonight's music video, which was mostly close-ups of Phil Collins' face. It's instead a reference to the Dairy Milk ad in which an extremely patient gorilla waits through the entire song before launching into the drum solo.
At the end of the episode, Crow is sucked up by a tube and transported to Moon 13. As the tube looms over the robot, his scream sounds vaguely familiar. That's because Hampton Yount is imitating the stock scream used in many TV shows, films, and commercials known as the Howie scream. Not to be confused with the Wilhelm scream, the Howie scream is said to originate from William Friedkin's brilliant 1980 film, The Ninth Configuration. We'll have a link to a YouTube video entitled Howie Scream for 12 Hours in our show notes.
The clean-shaven security guard at the grocery store that pulls a gun on Papa Mac is an unrecognizable George Buck Flower. Flower, a character actor, specialized in playing tramps, vagrants, and unseemly types. It was one of 3 alien adventures that decade, as Flower acted in 2 excellent John Carpenter movies, 1984's Starman and They Live, the latter released the same year as Mac and Me.
Tom Servo hopes to see a bathing lady duck when Eric pulls the curtain back on a running shower. The lady duck in question is briefly seen at the beginning of George Lucas's Howard the Duck. When Howard is pulled to Earth by mysterious forces, he passes through the apartments of several fellow ducks, one of whom is taking a bath. Curiously, the lady duck in the bath is given 2 breasts with pink human nipples in a scene that only George Lucas would insist on putting in a movie.
As Max sips on a can of Coke, Crow jokes,
Wow, Peter Lorre is thirsty.
Classic character actor Peter Lorre is known best for his roles alongside Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon, where he always plays the bad guy. Though his large, expressive eyes, childlike face, and short, stocky frame wouldn't immediately suggest overpowering wickedness, the Hollywood Reporter noted, there is perhaps no one who can be so repulsive and so utterly wicked. No one who can smile so disarmingly and still sneer. His face is his fortune.
Meanwhile, Tom compares Mac to a shaved elf.
They shaved Elf.
And just as Frankenstein is the name of the doctor and not the monster, Alf is not the alien's name, but his classification. ALF stands for Alien Life Form, just as MAC is an acronym for Mysterious Alien Creature. ALF's real name is Gordon Shumway.
Ever wonder why Eric is lying prostrate in his chair as the gas station explodes? Originally, Eric was shot by the police and killed right before the explosion. This sequence was cut from most releases of the movie, but the extended ending survived for Japanese home video releases. We'll have a link to the Eric gets shot ending in our show notes.
And that's time! I think now is as good a time as any to get into the classic, iconic characters that you see in this movie, namely Ronald McDonald, Grimace, Birdie, the Professor, the Fry Guys.
Now hold on. Only Ronald McDonald is in this movie.
I know, but I'd like to think there's a director's cut out there that had like a really nice subplot with Grimace. Or maybe just one scene like John Candy's cameo in JFK.
So we're talking about the characters from McDonald Land, where they've had a cartoon tie-in just like everybody else had in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, you needed a mascot. And frankly, the McDonald Land mascots totally worked because I don't know if you remember the BK Kids Club.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah, they were bloozers. There was like a kid named like Vid Kid, and he had glasses on. He may or may not have been the kid in the wheelchair. I forget. They were junk.
Yeah.
There was nothing good about them and their stupid dog.
Yeah, like I don't like clowns, but I always found Ronald McDonald to be pleasant. He doesn't bother me.
That's what McDonald's was going for. The clowns won't bother you. Yeah, I always liked the ads for McDonald's, and they definitely were embedded in my imagination because I remember years later when I took part in the 24-hour art marathon in Newfoundland, I created a comic that was a series of anthology stories, but the story that took up the bulk of the comic was of an older Ronald McDonald who had left town but returned to McDonald Land, only to see how far his friends had fallen, how strung out the Hamburglar was, and how Grimace had 8 kids called Grimlets, which he nourished with his many lactating teats.
Damn, that's dark.
Yeah. Hamburglar was just robbing to feel alive at this point. Like, I was trying to go for, I think, a Killing Joke vibe with McDonald Land characters. I don't know. That thing's lost to time.
And this is something I feel happens a lot with McDonald's, but they got on the wrong side of a court battle. They were sued by Sid and Marty Krofft for basically ripping off their character HR Puffin stuff in their creation Mayor McCheese. And I do recall, like, when I was old enough to be aware, Mayor McCheese was sometimes still part of various playlands, but it wasn't part of their active campaigning or promotions anymore.
Yeah, you would still see some of the characters, but they were dying out as the 90s went on. There was like less and less of a focus on Birdie and the Fry Guys, who were multicolored pom-poms with shoes and bug eyes.
Actually, I think Birdie stayed longer because she was the only female character and she was the breakfast one.
Yes, because the bird is breakfast food.
No, the early bird gets the worm.
Yeah, this delicious McDonald's worm.
To some extent, I feel like it's just like, it was of the era. Like, HR Puff and stuff is kind of like Sesame Street. Like, it was just in the air in the 70s.
Yeah, that's essentially when they were created. Like in 70, 71, thereabouts, McDonald's got their advertising agency, Needham, Harper, and Steers, to come up with a fantastic imaginary world, which was later McDonald Land, and to come up with the characters for it. So Ronald McDonald was already in existence, and it was just a matter of giving him a supporting cast.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's interesting is that a few of these cast members got revised as time went on, because Grimace used to be a bad guy.
Yes, I do hear that. I've never seen any early versions, but apparently he had 4 arms.
Yes, he had 4 arms and big angry eyebrows, and he was Grimace the Shake. That's why he looks the way he does. He's supposed to be a milkshake. Why the milkshake is purple, I do not know. But I love Grimace and his big doofy voice. I'd like to think, because the initial Grimaces, apparently the angry Grimace, was supposed to speak a bit more coherently, that Ronald McDonald took him aside and lobotomized him, and then cut off 2 of his arms.
Of course. So this whole McDonald Land thing slowly died off and then eventually was basically put to bed when they decided that they would focus on the campaign that Leo Burnett created, the I'm Loving It campaign, and that basically kind of killed the whole McDonald Land off for good.
Oh, it's a shame because, I'm Loving It replaced the original slogan I grew up with, food, and fun.
Yeah. I was thinking about, why do I have nice memories? Why am I willing to forgive McDonald's its sins and not Coca-Cola? And I think it's because it will cry uncle a lot faster when it comes to, consumer discontent. And they've had a lot of unfair accusations thrown at them.
Yeah.
Over the years.
The pink slime debacle.
Pink slime debacle, the rumor that their burgers were made out of worms or of newspaper. The fact that they switched from styrofoam to paper in the 80s for their wrappings, whereas Coca-Cola still to this day resists any kind of recycling initiative in any way, shape, or form for their product. The fact that they caved to the fry controversy, where they were really pushed to change from beef tallow because people were convinced it was causing heart disease. And they had to switch to a much less delicious vegetable oil, which now, who knows what causes heart disease? It's a lot more complicated than what kind of oil you use.
I think you and I both know the answer is 4-armed Grimace.
Yeah. So I feel like it's a beleaguered kind of company, whereas Coca-Cola, they supported apartheid. They destroy water supplies. They push themselves into schools. I don't know. I feel no sympathy for them and their declining product.
Well, here's where I would play devil's advocate, Beth. Because sure, maybe they've ruined a few water supplies, and maybe they've supported a few apartheids here and there. But who was it who introduced kids to max headroom with the introduction of New Coke? Why, it was Coca-Cola, of course. And I have nothing but fuzzy memories for them for giving Matt Frewer a paycheck. Also, with all the evil they do, I can't help but imagine that Coca-Cola is run by Cyril Sneer of the Raccoons. And he was easily the best part of the Raccoons because I did not care for those tree-loving raccoons. Damn thing stole my chocolates.
I would have to agree. Maybe a lot of viewers don't know what we're talking about because it's a very Canadian show. But
on this podcast, why I never.
But Cyril Sneer was amazing and had the best character voice I think I've ever encountered.
Yeah. This Cyril Sneer medal will be awarded to the pig who brings back the best presentation.
That was really good.
Thank you.
Try to surprise Cyril Sneer? Well, I love to spoil surprises.
I loved Cyril Sneer. He kind of sounded like George C. Scott having a heart attack.
Yeah. Which basically was the character, too.
Yeah. But Cyril Sneer ruled. Oh, God. When can we start our Raccoons podcast?
Let's do it.
So I'm just gonna jump in here, and I'm just gonna say that Kid Vid was not the one in the wheelchair.
Oh.
Yeah, the kid in the wheelchair was named Wheels. Another fun factoid. The word grimace was originally pronounced grimace.
Bernice, Grimace.
Grimace, yeah.
Now, I understand that we call it Grimcorn, but others call it Grimace. I guess I have two questions. E.T. never promised a sequel. E.T. was an event. And in fact, most Spielberg movies are events that cry out to not have sequels. And regrettably, we've seen continued insistence on Jurassic Park sequels, and prior to that, the amazingly bad Jaws sequels. But Mac and Me really wants to come back, and I really hope they make it just to call the movie Return of the Mac.
Yeah, and I really appreciate a movie that is willing to just terminate itself at the end, you know? It knows it's done.
Like Terminator 2.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we've talked about this before. You are not a huge fan of E.T.
No. I always found E.T. to look nightmarish, and I'm not alone. That's fairly common, because E.T. looks like a poop with hands.
You know what he actually reminds me of? The baby from Eraserhead.
I mean, yeah, if you cross the baby from Eraserhead with Zelda Rubinstein, you've got E.T.
But I mean, people loved him.
I know, but you know, I'll never figure that out. I have never been a Spielberg fan. Never, ever. And there's something about his competent schmaltziness that always leaves me cold. He's made two great things. One is Duel, because he had an amazing script by Richard Matheson. And the other is the first proper TV episode of Columbo. That's your Spielberg right there. I don't give a damn about E.T.
Well, I have to disagree. I was always really impressed by his 80s movies and just how uplift and excitement and joy they can create. I don't know how he does that, but it's really infectious. But if we're talking about E.T., that was also my first encounter with the manipulation of film, because I agree. I also found E.T. grotesque. I did not find him cute at all. I remember a friend of mine had a very convincing plushy version of E.T. and it had that kind of wet-looking leathery skin and everything. And I couldn't be in the same room with it.
Yeah, E.T. looks like one of the Cenobites. He's awful.
Apparently this was quite a personal movie for Spielberg in terms of that it was about his parents' divorce and grappling with the loss of the dad figure in the family. So that gets replaced by this weird little alien. So apparently that gives it a lot of its emotional heft. But as much as I do think that Spielberg has, a real talent, I did not like E.T. I still to this day do not understand how it was the biggest grossing movie of the 80s.
Oof. I'll go one further, because when E.T. was released, it was not even the best Alien movie that year. John Carpenter's The Thing came out, I think, 6 weeks later, and Americans had gone overboard for the lovable alien that loved Reese's Pieces and Speak and Spells. And by the time the nasty metaphor for disease movie came out, people were calling it pornography. John Carpenter's The Thing may have gotten the worst reviews of any movie, even though it's the best movie ever made.
I have yet to see it. But I do recall one of the things that I resented most about the movie was, number one, the alien is unpleasant to look at. And two, I didn't like that this alien that was unpleasant to look at somehow made me cry over its death. That was my first awareness I had, that this movie is manipulating me into feelings that I don't really think I would feel otherwise. It's a combination of the actors and the music and the lighting and the plotting. It's all forcing these tears out of me when I actually don't care about this sausage creature whatsoever.
I can't remember which video this is, but in a video about the importance of music in film, Red Letter Media briefly addressed what E.T. is like without the score, and it is super, super awkward.
Really?
Yeah, it's just this uncomfortable creature lumbering around and people kind of watching it wordlessly trying to project awe. It's amazing.
So I'm curious, when was the last time either of you watched E.T.?
There was a home video release that had one of those giant clamshell cases which is one of the joys of VHSs back in the day. So you'd have that white box, but the artwork kind of in a slip-in. And it was a remastered widescreen release, but it was before Spielberg replaced the guns with walkie-talkies.
Right.
And cut a few bits of bad language out, such as the best part of the movie, the penis breath line.
Yeah.
I think I saw it in high school the last time I saw it.
Okay, so I decided to watch it last night because I hadn't seen
boy.
it since I saw it in the theaters when it was first out. I feel like it is the most sort of technically good movie that I have no interest in that I've ever seen. I didn't care for it at all. I was sort of bored watching it while also being like, well, this is well done.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel watching every Spielberg movie.
Yeah, it is. It's beautifully shot, and what they do with light in that movie is just so incredible.
Sure. And the acting's very good and the music's perfectly fine. And like, it's well made. I just don't care. I don't care about any of this.
Chris, I believe our Mac attack has ended. Do you have a final factoid about this little experience for us?
I do. I have a little tiny one for you. Do you know what the original title in the first draft of the script was for E.T.?
Untitled Wendy's Alien Product.
It was E.T. and Me.
Oh.
I have no idea if the Mac and Me people knew that, because its name got changed pretty quickly, and that wasn't the shooting title that they used to. It was called like A Boy's Life or something like that. I forget. But yeah, E.T. and Me. So not that too far off. Okay, I'll give you another little tiny bonus fact. For a while after this film came out, Jade Caligari, who is the actor who plays Eric, the kid in the wheelchair, he got so sick of being asked the question, "Why are you in a wheelchair?" that what he would do was he would look the person dead in the eye and he would say, "Vietnam."
Nice.
Very well done.
Good Jade job.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you've ever been kidnapped by horribly disfigured aliens, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. It's Just a Show is a podcast from Megaphonic FM, and you can find all our fancy little shows over at megaphonic.fm. And thanks again to all of our Patreon supporters. Aw, you make our hearts glow. You can support It's Just a Show and access some superfan bonus bits by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. We'd appreciate that. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today on It's Just a Show, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/41.
Well, guys, it looks like we zapped this corpse back to life. What are we going to do for our next episode?
Well, the holidays are on their way again. It's time for out with the new and in with the old. Old carols, old friends, old traditions, and wait, what's this? A present. It's come a little early. Why, it's Gamuary in December as we watch KTMA Episode 5, Gamera!
Oh, it's a Gamuary miracle. I like that it comes earlier and earlier each year.
I hate this turtle.
I can't wait. This is him. This is nothing but this turtle, Beth. This is his solo effort.
That's right.
There's no Baragon to distract.
There's no color to distract.
Nope. It's another Sandy Frank dub job, which features some amazing non sequiturs.
Well, I haven't seen this particular version, the KTMA, so maybe there'll be some hidden gems.
Yeah. And actually, if memory serves, this might be a Joel solo episode.
What?
Yeah.
Well, that'll be interesting if nothing else.
And we'll get to watch an actually 30-year-old episode. But until then...
Coke is life. That was actually one of their jingles for a while.
And this episode has been sponsored by Red Wigglers, the Cadillac of Worms.
We'll see you next time. Take it away, Theme Squad.
Damn, that's dark.